Are you a gamer who's played way too much D&D or Baldur's Gate Early Access and wants to delve immediately into multiclassing? Are you someone who's excited for the potential improvements to itemization and the multiclass progression system? Or are you someone who's just bored out of their minds and can't help but theorycraft builds until August 3rd when Baldur's Gate finally makes its way to us? Well, if you've answered yes to any of those questions, then we are in the exact same boat, and that's precisely why I've made this video today. Greetings adventurers, it's Kazu here, and we'll be covering the second part of my guide to multiclassing. Today we'll be covering important tips as well as some flavorful builds based upon my experiences trying out tons of multiclassing in D&D 5e as well as all of the early access classes available in Baldur's Gate 3. So for those of you curious about the builds that will be featured in this video, the first one is going to be a Paladin Warlock dual wielding multiclass, which sounds crazy I know, but there is an early game item that we can get which grants us conditionally a second bonus action, and that's going to free up our bonus action to make the offhand weapon attack while also being able to use smite spells, use our channel divinity, cast other spells, all sorts of things. So it's actually incredibly strong early game. Unfortunately, I only have enough time to really go over that build. We're gonna feature the next two builds, which is gonna be the Spores Druid Monk as well as the Tempest Cleric Storm Sorcerer, both of which are very flavorful and very fun in the next video, because otherwise this video would just be like 30-40 minutes long and I don't want to waste too much of your guys' time on theorycraft. So those are going to be in part 3 of this guide. Stay tuned for that. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. And again, as a disclaimer, if you don't know already, this video was made in early access. All the content available in the video is only going to be from what's available in the early access of Baldur's Gate 3, confirmed information from Larian Studios in any of their posts, or rules from the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition player's handbook, which the rules of Baldur's Gate 3 is based upon. So if there's any changes, any updates, I will post those below in a pinned comment, and I will do my due diligence to verify and make sure this information is accurate upon release of the game. So let's get straight into the video and go over some fun tips. Starting with tip number 1, your first level decides your saving throw proficiency. So upon character creation, you start at level 1 where you can pick your first class. This choice will define what your starting proficiencies, features, and equipment are. Although you can respec once you find a specific NPC in Act 1, the class that you choose for the first level will decide what saving throw proficiencies you have, and multiclassing will not grant you additional saving throw proficiencies. I'm going to throw up the class saving throw proficiencies that you start with so that you can have an idea of what you're working with. If, for example, you want to start with Constitution saving throw proficiencies to maintain concentrations on spells, you might be better off starting as a sorcerer who has proficiency in Constitution and Charisma, rather than a bard who has proficiency in Dexterity and Charisma saving throws. In D&D 5e, your first level also decides whether or not you can get access to heavy armor proficiency through classes like Fighter, Paladin, and some cleric subclasses. Although I have a feeling that Larian won't leave the restriction in place where if you multiclass to gain a heavy armor proficiency, you would not get access to it. If you started as a wizard and then went into fighter, you would not gain heavy armor proficiency in D&D 5e. I have a feeling that's not going to be the case here, so feel free to not worry about that, and I will verify this information upon release of the game. Tip number 2 is level 1 subclasses. The cleric, sorcerer, and warlock classes all gain access to their subclass features at level 1, so they are some of the best classes to take a level 1 dip in if you just want access to unique features as soon as possible. You can take a dip in War Cleric for a bonus action extra attack a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier per day, or take a dip in Draconic Sorcerer for extra HP per level and a base armor class of 13 plus your dexterity modifier. This also means you get a lot more flavor from these, since classes like the Cleric would have access to different spells depending on their subclass. So if you were playing a Paladin and you wanted to get that Solaire character vibe, you might take a level 1 dip in Sun Cleric, which is going to give you access to the Warding Flare feature, but also going to give you access to the Burning Hand spell. Tip number 3 is that there is no stacking of shared features. So some features in the game have very similar names, if not the same names, and those are not going to stack, excluding the ability score improvements and features you can get at levels 4, 8, and 12. If you play a fighter, you will get another ability score improvement or feat at level 6, and rogue will get another ability score improvement or feat at level 10. So those stack together, but for everything else, such as the cleric and paladin's channel divinity, the uses you get are not going to increase. You're not going to get a second use of channel divinity for multiclassing into paladin if you're a cleric. Okay, so I just double checked in game, and Paladin does have a channel oath charges, which is named differently from how it is in D&D 5e. It's channel divinity, and it would stack with the Cleric Channel Divinity, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case here. So you're probably going to get one of each per rest. Of course, if you level up as a Cleric, you'll probably get more Channel Divinity uses, but either way, they actually will be separate in Baldur's Gate 3. But as far as features of the same name, such as Unarmored Defense from Monk and Barbarian, like those aren't going to stack together either. It will choose whichever one of the two gives you higher AC, so either your Dex and your Constitution or your Dex and your Wisdom, and you're going to get the benefits of just that version of the Unarmored Defense if you multi-class a Monk and a Barbarian together. If you want extra attack and you play something like Fighter level 5 with a Ranger level 5, those extra attack features are not going to stack and you're not going to get 3 attacks per turn. You're only going to have extra attack once unless you go 11 levels into Fighter for the 2 times extra attack feature exclusive to Fighter. So even though Larian Studios said that they're going to be implementing some changes to the progression system to allow for Marshals multiclassing to get the extra attack at level 5 still, those Marshal classes would only be the Barbarian, Fighter, Paladin, Monk, and Ranger, and only the Fighter would still be able to get to the 2 times extra attack feature if they had 11 levels in it. So you could take at least a 1 level dip into another class and it would not affect you getting 3 attacks. Tip number 4 is about Warlock Pact spell slots. So for those of you who don't know, the Warlock is the only class that has a unique spellcasting system separate from all the other classes. Warlock Pact spell slots don't count as a spellcaster for the purposes of multiclassing, and they don't count towards your spellcaster progression. However, because you get to use their slots separately, they also restore on a short rest or a long rest. So you get 2 short rests per day and 1 long rest at the end of the day, which means that you basically get 2 additional refills of your pack spell slots over the course of a day. That's really good. For example, a level 4 character that is a sorcerer level 3 and a warlock level 1 will have access to 2 second level spell slots and 4 first level spell slots from being a 3rd level sorcerer, but they also get an additional 2 first level pack slots from their first level warlock. So these pack spell slots can be used either for sorcerer or warlock spells and would restore on short rests. You can even use the pack slots for features like sorcerer points or Paladin's Divine Smite, and that'll give you some extra mileage on those features throughout an adventuring day. So tip number 5 is on itemization. This is going to be a huge part of multiclassing. There are likely going to be hundreds of items that have unique effects or special synergies with certain classes that you can take advantage of while multiclassing. Although since we don't know what all these items are, and the game hasn't come out, I'm just going to discuss the ones that have been confirmed either through early access or from the recent Panel of Hell playtest. So one of these items is the Warped Headband of Intellect, which is an uncommon item that's going to set your intelligence to 17. There are tons of items like this in D&D where they set your ability score to a fixed value, and these are really good for characters that have dumped that stat but still want to multi-class in a class that requires the ability score. So for example, with the Warped Headband of Intellect, you can just dump your intelligence to 9, it doesn't even matter. Once you equip this item, it's 17, which makes you a semi-decent wizard for the purposes of spellcasting. This means that you can find other items potentially in the game that are going to boost dexterity or maybe strength or maybe charisma, and you can effectively dump that stat to make a multi-class, which normally would be very difficult because it's multi-ability score dependent or mad. But with this item, it bolsters your ability score so you can have high strength, you could get an item that covers for your dexterity, and then you could still have decent constitution and then decent wisdom if you were playing something like a monk barbarian, right? The next item we're going to talk about is the Blazer of Benevolence, which is another uncommon item that gives you 4 temp HP whenever you give someone Bardic Inspiration. So you could use this specifically for a College of Valor Bard, but if you wanted to multi-class and maybe be a Paladin Bard, this would be a really awesome item because you would be buffing yourself, making yourself a little bit tankier, padding that HP, but also giving Bardic Inspiration to an ally, buffing them up as well. For our Paladin Warlock build, we're going to talk about later, we actually are going to go into detail on how a couple items can be used to specifically impact the build of the Paladin Warlock. There's one in particular that gives us an extra bonus action so that we can have 2 bonus actions rather than 1. And that's really big for a class that has way too many things to do with their bonus action. So tip number 6 is making use of non-ability score dependent spells and features. Following the previous mentioning about having builds that are ability score dependent, if you want a multi-class but you don't have a good ability score in that class, you can still make use of it and its features, spells, and abilities by finding the ones that don't scale with the class and they don't scale with the ability score. So for example, if you are a fighter multi-classing in a wizard purely for spellcasting, you can still learn spells such as Resistance, Blade Ward, Find Familiar, and the Shield spell, and these will benefit you the same regardless of your intelligence ability score. Class features such as Portent or Action Surge are also good regardless of what build you have, so you can always get a lot of value even out of these kind of unusual multi-class combos. Last but not least, we have tip number 7, which is going to be on cantrip scaling. So this is a really big one. You should always take into consideration that cantrips scale in damage with character level rather than class level. This is unique to pretty much cantrips only. Everything else requires that you increase the levels of that character class to get stronger and stronger, but cantrips, regardless of your class levels, is going to get better at level 5 and at level 11 for the cases of Baldur's Gate 3. This means that a level 5 character that's multi-class to 1 level of Warlock and 4 level of Sorcerers is going to still be able to fire 2 blasts from an Eldritch Blast attack similar to how a level 5 Warlock would because of the way that cantrips scale. It's really important, and it's also why multi-classing as spellcasters is pretty viable. Alright, so now that we've covered all of my tips on multiclassing, we're going to actually get into our build, which is going to be the dual-wielding Paladin Warlock, otherwise known as the Pallylock build. Again, I will feature the other 2 builds, which is going to be the Spores Druid Monk multiclass, as well as the Tempest Cleric Storm Sorcerer multiclass in another video. We're going to definitely run out of time here because it's already past 11 or 12 minutes. But anyhow, this Paladin build is going to be basically dual-wielding weapons so that we can make up for the lack of an extra attack feature that we're going to get at level 5 since we're going to put 1 level in Warlock. We're going to delay our progression a little bit, but by taking Warlock, we're actually going to be able to shore up on some of the weak points of Paladin, namely the lack of any range damage, as well as the fact that they run out of spell slots extremely quickly as hybrid casters in fights. So being able to cover for those weaknesses actually increases our DPR and damage over the course of an entire adventuring day. You're going to be dealing a lot more consistent damage rather than having these big Nova swing turns and then running out of steam for the rest of the fight. Also, thematically speaking, taking a multi-class into Warlock as a Paladin means that, you were someone who took on an oath, but because of an otherworldly patron or deity, you found that you could get additional power, maybe to, ends justify the means, or you could achieve your goals easier by taking on this sort of pact, giving your character a dark twist, perhaps changing their morals if you want to play a character that's more on the neutral or maybe even the chaotic good side, going down the Pallylock path, or the lawful evil side actually. Going down the Pallylock path is very interesting in terms of flavor. So we're starting at level 1. We are going to start out as a Paladin, and we're going to play things as a regular Paladin. Level 1, you actually do get to pick your subclass, which is your Oath, and it's going to give you a small feature. Depending on what you pick, you can go Oath of the Ancients, Oath of Devotion, which are currently out in Early Access, or the Oath of Vengeance, which is going to be really strong, but that doesn't come out until the release version of the game. And of course, you can also break your oath while playing as any one of these 3 subclasses and then end up as an oath breaker if you so wish. So there's lots of options for this build. I don't actually have a specific subclass in mind. All of them will synergize in different ways, but definitely you might want to consider the Oath of the Ancients or the Oath of Vengeance because both of those have features that are bonus actions, so it doesn't take up our entire action to use. And as you're going to see later, we're going to actually have 2 bonus actions in a lot of cases. So again, starting at level 1, we're going to get proficiency in heavy armor and martial weapons, which is huge, plus the Lay on Hands feature for healing and the Divine Sense feature for getting advantage on undead, fae, and fiends. That's also very useful, but more situational. So for the purposes of character creation, you can pick any race you'd like. I recommend Dragonborn, Drow, as well as Tiefling, because those really fit the darker aesthetic of the character we're looking for. But all that really matters is that you get your ability scores up to 16 in both Strength and Charisma, which puts us at a +3 modifier. Once we hit level 4, we're not going to have our ability score improvement, and when we do get our ability score improvement, which would be at level 5, we're going to put that into Dual Wielder, so we're not actually going to increase our ability score for quite a while. So we are going to be relying potentially on items later on to bolster our ability scores, but they're going to be 16 for Charisma and Strength for now. At level 2, you're going to get access to your first level spell slots as well as Divine Smite. It's going to be a bonus 2d8 damage to most creatures and 3d8 against undead creatures. So it's a significant damage boost even though you only get 2 slots to use them. and those only restore on a long rest. We're going to start using our dual wield short swords at this point, so you can find those from any enemies that you kill or buy them from a vendor, and that's going to allow us to use our bonus action for an offhand weapon attack. The damage is the same as a great sword if both attack hits, but we have 2 times the attacks to potentially land a hit on an enemy and get a smite off every turn, or rather just for 2 turns because we only have 2 spell slots. It's hard to calculate since the offhand attack doesn't get to add your strength modifier, but the average damage will be slightly higher than using a single weapon, even if we have the same chance to hit. So you can opt to use a sword and board or a greatsword if you want to free up your bonus action for spellcasting. Otherwise, if you're just going to be smiting, the dual wielding is significantly better. So at level 3, we're going to take our first level into Warlock, and this is where things get really interesting. So at this point, Paladins would be getting their subclass and subclass feature, which is their channel divinity option, but you're going to get something that's a lot more useful. Warlock spell slots, which are separate from your Paladin spell slots and restore on a rest, either short or long rest. And you're also going to get access to whatever subclass you pick for the Warlock. So you can either pick the Fiend, the Great Old One, or Archfey, which is not part of early access. Now, in my opinion, the Fiend is going to be the most useful one because its passive feature, the Dark One's Blessing, is going to restore health to you, or it's going to give you temporary health every time you kill an enemy, reduce their health to 0. So that health is going to be your charisma modifier plus your level. We don't know because when you look over it in game, it doesn't verify or clarify if it's your class level or your character level. If it's your character level, if you were a multi-class Pallylock at level 5, you would get 5 HP plus your charisma modifier, which would be on average 8 HP. That's really good per kill. If it's just your Warlock level, then you're not going to get a whole lot, or you're not going to get as much value out of it, so it really depends on that. Larian Studios might tweak it from how it is in D&D, where it is your class level rather than your character level, but we'll see. Archfey, with only 1 level, not really worth it. The ability Fey Presence is the equivalent of a channel divinity, but a lot worse. And then for the Great Old One, we have Mortal Reminder, which is going to proc on crit. There's no save against the frightened effect of it, but only being able to proc on crit makes it pretty unreliable. You could take it because you are going to be making 2 attacks every turn, even at level 3. So you have a higher chance to crit than most other classes that are only going to be attacking once per turn. But it's up to you. I think the Fiend is the best. We also get something really awesome as far as spells go for our Paladin, where we unlock 2 cantrips, and it doesn't really matter what the second cantrip option is, but the first cantrip that you have to take is going to be Eldritch Blast, which is pretty much the best range cantrip in the game. At level 5, your Eldritch Blast, regardless of whether or not you multi-class, right? If you have 4 levels of Paladin and 1 level of Warlock, when you hit level 5, your Eldritch Blast is going to go from 1 attack to 2 attacks. And if later on you put more levels into Warlock, you can put Agonizing Blast on it to add your Charisma modifier to that attack. So it's a really strong ranged cantrip. It gives the Paladin a form of ranged option that they did not have, that they could not have if they did not multi-class or take the feat for it. So it's really strong. We're going to also have access to the Warlock spells, which means we get Hex for an extra 1d6 damage, which is stronger than Divine Favor. We have Hellish Rebuke if you want to get more damage per round out, if you want to weaponize your reaction. And you even get spells like Armor of Agathis for some extra protection and temp HP. So if you go the Fiend, you're also going to have access to Burning Hands, which is an excellent level 1 AoE spell for damage, especially if you're getting swarmed as a Paladin. Normally, you're only going to have access to Cleave to deal with multiple enemies, and at best, that's going to hit like 2, maybe 3 targets. Burning Hands will give your character a way to deal with, large groups of smaller enemies where the Paladin might normally struggle with that. So again, right out the box, if we're looking at our damage, we can Hex an enemy. That's going to give us plus 1d6 damage each time we attack them, and then we can make 2 attacks, one with our main weapon and one with our offhand weapon, both of which can have a smite added onto it, and that would be a total of 2d6 plus 48, well actually 46 if we're using Hex, plus 48 plus our strength modifier worth of damage for an average output of 35 based on just the dice alone. Of course, if you want to factor in your chance to hit, which would be plus 5 at this level, and the high end of an enemy's armor class, which would be around 15, your DPR would probably be around 20 using a damage calculator. And it would be 33 if those attacks came in with advantage. So that's a pretty good amount of damage. It's going to definitely beat a straight class Paladin at level 3 because they just simply don't have... I mean, even if they're dual wielding and they smite on both attacks, your Hex is still stronger than Divine Favor. So it's going to be a little bit more damage than what any Paladin could do with level 3. That is going to flip later on with the other levels, and I'll talk about that. But essentially, playing this Pallylock multiclass, you are very versatile. The goal of the character and this multiclass build is to be versatile. You have your AoE, you have your range, you have so much things that the Paladin normally lacks in, although the Paladin is a pretty well-rounded class, so you're basically making yourself a one-man army. You can do everything. When it comes to the spell slots, a level 3 Paladin is going to have 3 first level spell slots. For the multi-class level 2 Paladin, level 1 Warlock, you're going to have 2 spell slots, first level spell slots, plus the Warlock Pact slot, and then you get 2 more of those because they reset on rest. So basically you get 5 spell slots, you get a total of 2 spell slots more than a level 3 Paladin. And that means if you're casting Hex or Divine Favor, you're going to have the capability to use that spell a lot more throughout the day, hopefully every fight. Or if you just want to burn it on other things like Burning Hands or Hellish Rebuke, that's always going to be an option too. You don't have to be as conservative with your spell slots as you would normally have to be as a Paladin. So at 4th level, we unlock our Channeled Divinity. If you are Oath of Devotion, you get Sacred Weapon, which gives us a bonus to attack. If you're Oath of the Ancients, you get 2 options, one that can restrain the enemies, one that can turn the Fey and Fiend creatures. If you're Oath of Vengeance, you're going to get Vow of Enmity, which is going to allow you to target one creature, get advantage on attacks against that creature. So that's potentially very impactful, especially for this build in terms of making you hit more reliably by yourself. Again, a self-sufficient build is kind of the idea behind this Pallylock, where we can do everything. So I'd say Oath of Vengeance for the Vow of Enmity here would be a really good choice in terms of just allowing us to deal even more damage. Now, comparing this to a straight class Paladin level 4, they would unlock their feat or their ability score improvement. So if a Paladin took Great Weapon Master, they would be getting ahead of us in damage. If they took the +2 to strength, got their strength to 18, then they are going to have a higher bonus to attack and deal a little bit more damage in their melee. Again, it's not that big of a deal. Great Weapon Master is a pretty big deal, but other than that, unless they're optimizing super hard, you're not going to see too much of a difference between a level 4 Paladin and the multi-class Pallylock that we have. But level 5 is a different story. So at level 5, we are going to take the Dual Wielder feat instead of an ability score improvement. So at 5th level, this is where the straight class Paladin will get their extra attack. It's entirely up to you if you want to respec and play the Paladin and get that extra attack, because it is that impactful. But I do think there's a compelling case for us to still stay as the Pallylock. When we hit 4th level in Paladin, we're going to get our ability score improvement or our feat, and we're going to take the Dual Wielder feat here, so we're not going to get the ability score improvement. Our strength is still going to be 16, but in exchange for that, we can now use any one-handed weapon that's not light and dual wield them together. So that gives you a hell of a lot more options for how you want to equip your Paladin. There's a ton of Warhammers, there's a ton of cool swords and other weapons, maces, axes that you can all take advantage of now. And the really nice thing is that you can mix and match their effects. Some are going to give you access to spells, some are going to give you access to weapon attack, some are going to give you access to nice passives that can increase your damage significantly. So it's actually a pretty big bump in our damage on top of increasing the damage dice we're using. So we're going from a short sword, which is a 1d6, to something like a long sword, which is going to be a 1d8. So automatically we're getting a bump up in damage with this dual wielder feat. And of course, another thing that would have to be the trade-off is the spell slots. You're going to only have 7 spell slots, all first level at this point, whereas the level 5 Paladin would have 2 second level spell slots as well as second level spells that they would know. Things like Aid could be really strong. You could upcast your Bless to affect the whole party. If you are an Oath of Vengeance or an Oath of the Ancients Paladin, you get Misty Steps. So those are really big things. I'll be honest, level 5 is probably better if you just straight class as a Paladin, but it's still fun and it's still impactful if you are playing this multi-class build. And beyond that, it's not really going to matter since all that content is after the early access, what's available in early access. At level 6, if you want to get Aura of Protection, by all means, just stick with Paladin, get the Aura of Protection. It's an absolutely busted feature. It adds your charisma modifier to all of your saves and all of everyone else's saves within 10 feet, as long as you're conscious, or as long as you're not incapacitated, which is honestly unreal. It's as good as your proficiency bonus most of the time, if not better. So it's kind of disgusting, and there's no contest for that. But afterwards, you really could consider putting a lot more levels into Warlock, getting your Pact of the Blade. Maybe that'll allow Charisma to scale with our weapons, which would be really nice. I'm not too sure what Larian wants to do with that, but everything beyond that is going to be theory craft. So before I finish off, I do want to go over itemization for this build and how the Pallylock can really take advantage of itemization for the purposes of Baldur's Gate 3. So there is going to be 2 items in particular, the Circlet of Fire as well as the Helmet of Grit. Both of these items conditionally can grant you a bonus action. The Circlet of Fire, you have to be attacking a target and deal fire damage to them with a non-cantrip spell. So Searing Smite is a really good candidate. That's pretty much the only candidate for our character. But then we also have the Helmet of Grit, and that procs when you are below 50%. You get a second bonus action as long as you are below 50% health. So it's pretty easy to make use of. And there's even an item in the game called Loviatar's Scourge, which deals 1d6 necrotic damage to the target you hit as well as everyone nearby, including yourself. So it also gives you resistance to necrotic damage, but this basically will inflict damage upon yourself so that you can get to that 50% health threshold faster. Of course, it is going to be risky to be dealing damage to yourself, to be low on health, but with that second bonus action, you are going to be able to do so much more. So for the purposes of our Pallylock, even a regular Paladin, when you attack with 2 weapons, and you are dual wielding especially, right, you can use your bonus action to make the offhand attack, but if you just click on somebody to attack them, it will automatically use your action and your bonus action to attack them twice. And then you can still do your offhand weapon attack. So you can actually make 3 attack without extra attack, which is kind of insane. You can smite 3 times in 1 turn, sub level 5, without haste. And I mean, if you did have extra attack and you'd haste, I mean, you would be attacking a lot of times. So that would be pretty nasty either way. But having the bonus action for either 2 extra attacks or casting our Divine Favor, casting our Hex, using our Channel Divinity or our Channel Oath, it's going to give us so much more flexibility with this build and basically makes the character like significantly stronger in terms of DPS. Also, I do want to recommend that if you're dual wielding, you actually dip your weapons into a torch before you get into a fight. That way you can get some extra fire damage. You could dip them into other sources if you're fighting targets that are resistant to fire, but that's pretty much the easiest way to get some extra damage, and it's doubly beneficial because you have 2 weapons rather than 1, so you're getting an extra 2d4 fire damage rather than 1d4 fire damage per attack. So keep that in mind. That's pretty much going to be it. If you have any other questions on this build or itemization, do let me know in the comments. Of course, there's going to be so much more content. Probably, I think they said 25 to 50% more content in Act 1 once the game comes out on full release. So nothing set in stone yet. Of course, this build should be viable, especially early levels, but might fall off at 5 and 6 and then come back up after those levels. And I will be working on other build videos as well, so keep an eye out for that. But that's pretty much going to be it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like or comment. That always helps out the channel. Hit the subscribe button if you're interested in more content, and the bell notification button if you want to be notified when the next video comes out for Baldur's Gate, because I'm going to be pumping out content for Baldur's Gate like crazy. I love Dungeons & Dragons and Baldur's Gate like so much. Honestly, unholy. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day and week.